just to conceptualize what I mean when I say movement in music, I want to try a quick exercise. I would like you to say the word pow when I give you the cue.
Pow.
Again.
Pow. 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 Pow.
Great. So without any description of what dynamics I wanted or what kind of expression I wanted from you, you gave me that collectively. And you might think that that was efficacious just because we're a group of choral people and we're sort of automatons in that sense. But the truth is, I've done this with a group of 500 people who are non-musicians entirely, and it worked exactly the same way. In fact, there was a ripple of laughter throughout the audience afterwards because they realized, oh my gosh, we just did this thing together as a group. And that all generated from movement. I was not creating any sound up here. And of course, this is the magic that we all harness as educators and conductors when we're in front of a group. We might imagine that magic looking a little bit like this. And in reality, that's not too far off. It often looks something like this. So is it magic, science, or a little bit of both? And I think most of us would probably say it's that ineffable combination of both. But it's worth looking at the cognitive science behind what's actually happening in a musical performance. So I'm going to discuss what I'll call the stakeholders in a musical experience. There's the composer, the conductor, the performer, and of course the audience member. In the traditional model, which is down here below, the conductor is seen as somebody who exists along this horizontal axis that goes between musicology or the score in front of them and the performers. And if you can look at this dotted line in the middle, this metaphorical scrim kind of delineates active participants from passive participants in the moment of performance. So you've got your active musicians here, your active performers here, and according to this model, the audience's perception is coming directly from the musicians via sound. But cognitive science challenges this, and hopefully all of you are a little bit uncomfortable with this as well. So here's what cognitive science has to say. Number one, visual perception affects music learning. In one particularly surprising study, 22 non-musicians learned a simple piano sequence in one of two ways, either by observing silent finger movement and imitating those motions on a soundless keyboard, note that no sound was coming through the keyboard, or by listening to a passage and then attempting to recreate it. The participants who learned visually without any sound at all, even in their own reproduction, were significantly more successful and accurate than their counterparts who could hear but not see the original performance. Is that surprising to anybody? That was a little bit surprising to me, especially in considering our dependence on notation in Western music. Also, even more surprising, or maybe not, visual perception affects sound perception. So a team of researchers found that viewers are more likely to rate choral performances with a highly expressive conductor as more expressive than those with a less expressive conductor. All of this sounds great, right? But that's even when the performance audio is sonically identical. So they were listening to the same audio, but the visual impact was so great that they actually perceived one as more musical than the other. I want you to all close your eyes and just listen to the sounds being created in this next clip. Close your eyes.
Ba 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 ba.
Go ahead and open your eyes. Tell me what you heard. Ba ba. Great. Now watch again. I'm literally just going backwards and replaying the same clip.
Ba 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 ba.
Did anyone hear da that time? Several of you, yes. So the visual has a critical impact on the way that we sonically process music. And this is called the McGurk effect. You may have run into that before. Take a look really quickly at this picture in front of you. This is one of the choirs that I conducted at the American International School of Utah. I had the profound experience to be the founding director for a school in a Title I area with kids that had failed out of a lot of other schooling systems. And they came with their whole heart and soul. They wanted a place to fit. They wanted a place to belong. So when we put them in a choir program, that gave them a vehicle for expressing that whole self. So they weren't only using a voice, they were imbuing everything that they had into the music. And you can see how physically engaged they are. Not all of them have great posture. Some of them have the chin sticking out, or but they were fully embodying the music. And I think in this photo especially, you can just see that sheer joy of song. Now look again at these faces, and I'm going to put up some statistics in this group. So of the students that you can see here, I made this list going through them one at a time. We had 2 with autism, 1 with PTSD, 9 with depression, 13 with anxiety, 1 with an abusive home environment, 3 with body dysmorphia, 2 with eating disorders, 9 with suicidal thoughts, 5 with issues with self-harm, and 2 suicide attempts, thankfully both unsuccessful. But for these students, music became a way not only of expressing who they were and connecting with others, but actually addressing the symptoms of these things that they were dealing with. And with the permission of this cute kid in the corner, whose name is Henry, I'm going to share part of his story that he typed up himself. He said, oh, and I should mention that he has very severe autism. He said, until 9th grade, I was kind of an outcast. The life-changing bit happened when I went to AISU. Day 1 in choir was awesome. I was actually just writing a song about it earlier. These kids were so creative. I wasn't just Henry the autistic kid, I was that guy with the low voice. It was oddly refreshing to have nothing in common but music. How many of you have ever felt that connection with others in a classroom regardless of your backgrounds? It's really incredible. For the next few years, it didn't matter that socializing wasn't really my thing. I had a group of people that all loved music as much as I did, and we couldn't afford to push each other apart over things like drama or autism. I am who I am today because of that choir, because it turns out you don't need years and years of therapy to overcome the symptoms of autism. Sometimes you just need a bit of music, or a lot. I've also included some quotes from students who preferred to remain anonymous, but from somebody with depression, choir saved my life. From somebody with PTSD, singing helped me express emotions when I felt I couldn't. It's been my saving grace. From somebody with anxiety, I often get high on music because it feels so good, all of these physical descriptors. And from somebody with autism and anxiety, a particularly poetic high schooler, the melodies have made me grow, the harmonies have molded who I am, I learned to listen to focus, I learned to balance and blend, the music is me. Here's a quick chart that demonstrates what happened in sessions both before and after a choral rehearsal. So oxytocin goes way up, stress levels go down, and you see it in comparison with chatting. So a choral rehearsal is more efficacious in terms of reducing your stress levels than a chat with your best friend. That's pretty powerful. Lots of physical benefits. And please notice just how tied in all of these things are with the physical being. It releases feel-good hormones, it boosts immunity, it lowers blood pressure, it improves breathing, it improves overall health and well-being, it lowers anxiety and stress. And again, I'm literally preaching to the choir here because you all know this, but it's worth talking about these things with our students so they know the benefits that they're getting, and they can be conscious of what's happening in rehearsal and figure out how to access that in the future. The people that you see in this picture, the woman here on the right, her name is Jill. She's an opera singer. And I had the opportunity while I was living in Ukraine to act as a translator for her when she and her husband came over to adopt. Originally, they were going to adopt 2 very healthy children from a wealthier orphanage. But when they came in person and began visiting different orphanages, they realized that according to the system there, and this is unfortunately still the case, all of the children who are labeled invalids in a very politically incorrect sense are put in a certain home, and they can have anything from a cleft chin to a limp to a learning disability, and they're all put in a separate orphanage. And typically those children pass away before they reach the age of 3 because the conditions and the care are just abysmal. So when they witnessed those conditions, they decided to instead adopt Keith and Christina, these 2 cute kids that you see on the left, essentially saving their lives. And through the power of love and unity and music, this is their family now. They've adopted since yet another child from Russia, and both of the kids are doing very, very well. Really quickly, some facts. It's important to understand what the situation is like in Eastern Europe right now. As of 2008, there were an estimated 730,000 orphans in Russia, and that's actually a lowball number because it's hard for them to actually get statistics in any sort of reliable way. Russian orphans are 3 to 7 times more likely to suffer from psychological disorders than orphans in Asian countries, and fetal alcohol syndrome among Russian orphans is 8 times the worldwide average. I'm going to be talking about reactive attachment disorder, which is along the fetal alcohol spectrum. And reactive attachment disorder is a rare and serious condition in which the infant or child does not establish healthy connections with others, with caregivers, with peers. And unfortunately, this often manifests in violent outbursts, and it can be really frightening for parents that have adopted from this area of the world. This is one of those families that adopted from Ukraine. It's actually my best friend Rachel over in the left-hand corner. This is a few years ago. And in the very center is Oleg, who they adopted from Ukraine. He had very severely violent tendencies. His family was concerned enough that they sought out therapy. And what they were told to do was to draw a circle on the ground, to place him inside the circle, and to only give him food and water and allow him to go to the bathroom, not to communicate with him, not to do anything else, until they had broken him down mentally to the point where they could begin to rebuild everything, until he had regressed to an infantile state. And you can imagine, I see your faces right now, and that was exactly my response too. I thought there has to be a better way. There really has to be a better way. And for kids with reactive attachment disorder, there are a lot of crossovers actually with autism. They have a hard time picking up on social cues. They have a hard time ascertaining what emotions they are experiencing themselves. And they have a really hard time connecting the abstract with the physical. So as my friend and her family were going through this, and I was witnessing it through them, I was also in a master's program out in Boston at the Longy School of Music, which just happens to have the oldest Doctoral's program. And Doctoral's has 3 prongs, as you may know: solfege, improvisation, and eurythmics. And so we were in eurythmics classes, which it's a form of music education primarily, and it's meant to help people latch onto really difficult abstract musical elements, things like phrasing, using physical movement to help in that process. And it also fosters self-awareness and a mind-body connection. So as I was in these classes, I thought, this is what these kids need. This is exactly what they need for their particular symptoms. But just quickly, I have a background as a composer, and I really believe that creating music should be as natural as speaking. We can look at the way, you can't see this very well, but we can look at the way a sentence breaks down with the subject and the predicate and the modifier. But honestly, most of us probably couldn't pick apart a sentence this way. We just know it sounds right, and we've grown up speaking it. Same thing goes for music. We can sit down with Roman numerals to understand what's going on, but there's also a more intuitive way to understand what's going on. And that's something that even children can tap into, and it's really effective. Just quickly to show you how eurythmics can work, and to get us moving a little bit since it's been a long few hours here, we're going to try a quick exercise. So, you're all music people, you know about chords, so we're going to take the shortcut round, and I'm going to tell you what to do when you hear certain chords. So, when you hear a chord that has a tonic function, and I'll give you a cheat sheet, just sit. That's all you have to do, you're home. When you hear a chord that has a subdominant function, it's going somewhere, simply stand up. When you hear a chord that has a dominant function that's pulling back towards the tonic, just bend your knees enough that you feel the engagement in your muscles and it's slightly uncomfortable. Does that make sense? So 3 positions: sitting, standing, knees bent. Yes? Start sitting. Pulled back, and reset. Very nice. Not a lot of musicality there, right? So there are things that we can do with the quality of movement to match the quality of music. So you might try this with something like a blues progression and encourage people to move, to groove with the beat, right? So let's try it with this blues progression. So start moving even as you're sitting. Nice and slow. You're going to be in each position for a while. Ready to stand? Keep the movement going. Yeah. so used to this going to this, right? But it didn't. So we start to learn how pop differs from blues, which differs from classical music. So the Harbor was the organization that we ended up partnering with. And I wanted to show you some quick examples of exactly what we did. My co-worker, Dr. Krista Sager, who has a DMA in cello performance, focused more on music in connection with music education broadly. So she focused on Kodai and movement.
Da, da, dee, dee, da, da, bravo, very good.
She also incorporated the use of instruments.
Oh my God, you do the boogie boogie and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. Ready for this hand? Like this? Okay?
I should quickly say we had 13 total sessions with them. We had 12 mother-child pairs. The group that we ended up working with were mothers who were very young, who had come through the orphanage system themselves and had symptoms of reactive attachment disorder. And their children, their infants, now had symptoms of reactive attachment disorder as well. So not only were we working with individuals, but we were working to help strengthen that bond between mother and child. So here's an example of eurythmics specifically and the way we utilize this.
Da, in jedna, it's and you
objectives was to help them learn how to switch between emotions, how to code switch. And when they could learn that they could physically respond to music, they could respond in a certain way to beautiful, soft music, and they could respond in a certain way to angry music, and then they could choose to switch their physical movements, then they began to have the tools to realize, oh, I can manage my mood. I can manage my emotions using music as a tool. So we wanted to improve outcomes in the areas of anger management, impulse control, delayed gratification. These are all things that are specific symptoms of reactive attachment disorder. And then we administered a survey, we had a focus group, and I won't go into this too much. We had them self-report, the mothers self-report using a 10-point Likert scale. This is an English version of the Russian survey that we gave them. And then again, I won't go too deeply into the results, but you can see here, the red is after and the blue is before. So there was significant improvement, and granted it was self-reported. However, it's pretty clear that this has an impact. And so it seemed like it was the beginning of something really exciting. Movement and music activate critical regions of the brain, triggering transformation. And I really believe that there's music and movement in music. Music experiences can be divided into active experiences and passive experiences. And unfortunately, when it comes to classical music, not when it comes to other forms of music, but when it comes to classical music, the trend right now is for it to be a very passive experience. So students coming into your classrooms will probably have had the following experiences with classical music. They may have heard something classical-esque in a movie in the background. They may have heard it as they were doing their homework because their mom thought that Mozart would make them smarter. They may have heard it in the background as they were at a restaurant. So it's this invisible, subservient, rigid, simplified thing. And really, this was made possible, of course, by technology. Not to say that technology is inherently negative, but it did change the face of the way that we interact with music. So in a sense, what we need is a return to 150 years ago, because if we went back in time 150 years to 1869, we would be attending performances not just in concert halls, but in living rooms, in parks. We might hear popular music and high art all in the same setting. We could dress according to the occasion. We could talk, we could walk around, we could throw rotten fruit if we didn't like something. We could clap, we could participate actively. We could experience classical music with members of nearly every demographic and social class, and we would be avidly following the lives and works of current composers. A little different than the situation today. I will say there are a lot of groups that are challenging the aesthetic that you see on the right, the more rigid aesthetic, where you go to a concert hall, you dress nicely, you sit quietly, you experience it with a subset that looks like you and thinks like you, and you prefer classical works composed over a century ago. You heard the phrase, the deader the better. The last thing that I'll say before I end here is that, and this is something that's been touched on already today, the human voice is not only an instrument, but it's a profound instrument of change for many reasons that we've already discussed. It's instantly accessible. There's no cost attached. It's essentially playable out of the box, which is pretty amazing. That's not to say that vocal technique isn't really important, but almost anybody who can match pitch can sit down and instantly start to create music. That's pretty incredible. It doesn't work that way with a violin or a flute usually. It's inherently vulnerable because it's not something external to you, it is you. It's an expression of who you are, it's internal. And there are fewer physical barriers between participants in an ensemble experience versus in an orchestra where you have an instrument in front of you. And it's already implemented most places at most levels of K through 12 education because of the reasons described above. So, as choral educators, we have this at our disposal. We are really at the crux of a change if there's going to be a change and if there's going to be a shift in thinking. So with that in mind, I invite you all to join me in helping us transform experiences from this into experiences that look a little more like this by capitalizing on the power of movement in